Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics for the PowerBasic Windows compiler. Today we will look at dialogues with conditional coding to activate or deactivate dialog controls. In the applications we've created up until now, all of these have had fairly simple dialogues. However, there will become a time when you're designing applications when your dialogues need to be more interactive with the user. Some of the objects on your dialog may need to appear and disappear or be activated and deactivated depending on what the user does or on some piece of underlying data. What we have on screen here is a fairly simple dialog. We have a text box to allow the user to enter a name. We have two drop-down lists which are populated. We have a tick box and we have two sets of date controls to allow the user to select a date to start and a date to finish. And at the bottom of the dialog we have two buttons, one to submit the form and one to exit the application. However, what if we want the tick box only to appear when the user has selected a specific department, for example facilities, and the tick box and its label are not to be selectable or usable when the user has selected something other than the facilities department. And as far as the start and end date controls are concerned, if the user picks yes for permanent staff, then there is no end date. If the user picks no for permanent staff, we want the end date control to appear. So how are we going to achieve this in our code? Let's have a look at the callback function, the event handler. The callback function is a special kind of function. This function will perform all the tasks that you need to happen when users interact with the controls on the dialog. When the dialog loads, there's an event which triggers called initialize dialog. This happens before the dialog is displayed to the user. So this gives you an opportunity to populate any controls on the dialog or set anything conditional. So what we've done in here to populate the department drop-down list is to set up the name of a file containing all the department names, which is in the same folder as our executable. We're testing to see whether that file exists using the isFile function, which is inbuilt to PowerBasic. If that returns true, then we can attempt to read the file into a local array. This array is dimensioned within our callback function. I'm then using one of the functions in one of the two libraries we have added. In this application, the two libraries we've added are the PB File Handling Routines library and the PB Windows Controls library. These two libraries contain a few functions we're going to be using within this application. The first of which is read the file into an array. This takes the file we've specified and loads it into a specified array, allowing us to load all the data at one go. The second function we're going to be calling is the populate combo function. It takes four parameters, the first being the handle of the dialog, the second being the handle of the combination drop-down list box that we wish to populate, the third is the array containing the data we wish to put into that combo box, and the final parameter which allows you to pre-select one of the items on the drop-down list. In this particular case, we don't want anything pre-selected, so we'll just set the selection variable to an empty len string. The second set of logic in here is to populate the yes-no drop-down list for permanent staff. For that one, we're simply redimensioning the array to have two items. We're then using the array sign command to set the two items up as being yes and no. There is again no pre-selection, and we're calling the populate combo function once more to populate that drop-down list. And then we're setting the focus to the text name. So that's our application as it starts now. So at this point in time, when the user actually sees the dialog for the first time, they have not yet selected the department. We want to either deselect the tick box so it cannot be selected, or to make it invisible. Generally, I find it much cleaner to make the object invisible. That way the user doesn't see on it and doesn't attempt to click on it. The same with the permanent staff. As we have not designated whether the staff are going to be permanent or temporary, then we'll want the end date box to disappear. So if we go back to our callback function, we're going to put in that logic. So we will first attempt to make the manual handling checkbox invisible to the user. We want to hide that control, and we also want to hide the label above it. We can perform that function quite easily by using the control hide command. It's followed by two parameters, the handle of the dialog and the handle of the object which you wish to hide. As we're going to be doing this twice, and in some cases with other applications you may be making a number of controls invisible, we can use the prefix command to save you a little bit of typing. Preceding the control hide command with the word prefix allows you to group all the objects you wish to make invisible at one go. So we can add to the list quite easily the label for the manual handling. What PowerBasic will do at compile time is it will prepend the control hide and the handle to the beginning of each of the next lines until it gets to the end of the prefix. This makes your code look tidier and is easier to follow. So we attempt to run our code now. We'll see that when the dialog loads, the tick box and its associated label are now invisible. So we'll now do the same thing for the permanent staff, where we want the end date and the control for the dates to be invisible to the user. So we will use exactly the same logic by putting in another prefix command and a control hide command, followed by the handles of the two date objects, the date control itself and the label above the date control. If we run that code now, we will see that the end date, date box and the label are now invisible to the user. So that handles setting up the dialog initially. Now what we need to do is we need to change the logic so that when the department is selected, for example facilities, that our checkbox and its associated label are displayed to the user. And then when you return to a different department, then those two objects will again be hidden. So it's back to the callback function, the event handler, to put the logic in there. So further down in our callback function, we're looking for the WM command section. This is where the process control notifications for objects on the screen are actually handled. And you'll see that the forms designer has already put in some case statements for each of the objects that's currently on the screen that the user can interact with. The one we're looking for is the CBO department object, and that's this one here. So we'll want to put some logic in here that handles a button click. And by pasting this in, where the control message equals BN clicked, or the control message equals 1, then we know that that object has indeed been clicked on. So we now need to interrogate this combo box to see what the department is currently set at, and we can do that using the control get text statement. This will work fine for this particular combo box, as this combo box only allows a single entry to be selected. So we pass this function the handle of the dialog, the handle of the object, and a variable into which you want to put the text that currently is selected on that object. So we'll need to declare this as a new variable at the beginning of our function. And having declared that, we can now test the value going into that variable. So if the value is facilities, we want to show the two objects to the user. Again, we're going to use the prefix command here to save a little bit of typing. So to show the object to the user, we're using control normalize. This normalizes the controls on screen, in other words, it makes them visible to the user. As before, it takes the two parameters, the handle of the dialog and the handle of the object you wish to show to the user. So we've added to this list the checkbox for manual handling and the label for manual handling. A good naming convention for all your objects makes it very easy to understand what we're actually doing. I've prefixed the name of my objects with CHK for checkbox and LBL for label. And as they're both to do with manual handling, I've got the remainder of the name as manual handling. You'll find this saves you a great deal of time debugging your code later on, or when you come back to your code in several weeks or months later. So that will handle showing these two controls when the facilities department has been selected. So if we run the application now, we'll see initially the two controls are not shown. If we pick facilities, they are now appearing on the screen and they are selectable. However, when we pick one of the other departments, they are not disappearing. So we'll need to put the logic in to hide these when some department other than facilities is selected. So back to the callback function, the event handler. So as we showed both of these objects before to the user when facilities was selected, we now have to hide the objects because facilities is not selected. And we will do this in exactly the same way as we did when we set up the dialog initially. We'll use the control hide command to hide both of these objects. If we run the application now, the two objects are initially invisible. We select facilities and they appear. We select some other department and they disappear again. So we now have to do the same for the start date. We have to, when the user selects not permanent staff, we want the extra date control shown, and when the user selects yes for permanent staff, we want it hidden again. So back to the callback function. And this time we're handling the CBO permanent staff object. So exactly the same logic. We're testing to see if the button has indeed been clicked. We're using the control get text command to pull back the selected text from that drop-down list. And we're populating the text variable with that value. And just as we did before, when the text equals null, we're making the end date controls visible, using control normalize. Otherwise, we're making them hidden again. So if we run our code again, we will see that since permanent staff is not yet selected, the end dates are invisible to the user, and as invisible, they cannot be clicked upon. And when the user selects no, the end date label and date control appear and allow the user to select from it. When we again select the yes from the drop-down list, these two controls will disappear from the user's site. So what we've seen today is a very straightforward method in your callback function, your event handler, for controlling what is visible and not visible to the user on screen. This will allow you to make your dialogues more interactive, either with underlying data or with what the user has selected on screen. This will give you the maximum amount of functionality with the minimum amount of code. Hopefully you'll find this useful in your applications, but that's it for today. Thank you for watching.